left-leaning folks tend to agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg that the Constitution is no longer a relevant document in our modern times, which is the same thing as saying that, hello, Ruth, as a Supreme Court justice, that would mean you're no longer relevant, so why should we care what you have to say? There's a lot of circular logic out there when it comes to the left, ladies and gentlemen. But if you're a left-leaner, maybe I can help pull you over to the center, at least. Because at the center, you get a pretty good look at what's going on at the right and what's going on with the left. And if you're going to have to lean one way or another, which one's safer for you financially? Which one's safer for you in terms of honest-to-goodness security? Which one's safer for you in actually being free? All right, before we go any further, it is that time. Let's go ahead and take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back to Tap Into the Truth. Come back and listen a little more, please. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Tap Into the Truth. With you as usual, this is your host, Tim Tapp, and right now we are discussing the next topic of the day, and that is the political theater that continues. Yes, that's right, the fiscal cliff. You know, I'm beginning to think that the same people that write scripts for some of the not-so-good dramas on the main networks have been involved with helping to write out the script for how the fiscal cliff negotiations is going to work out. Let me read to you a little copy as reported by the Huffington Post, and we'll comment a bit as we go along, starting with the fact that some of this is just flat out wrong. Anyway, let's get started digging into the truth, shall we? 3 hours shy of the midnight deadline, the White House and congressional leaders reached a deal to avert the so-called fiscal cliff. Several sources confirmed to the HuffPost that under the deal brokered by Vice President Joe Biden and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, Congress would permanently extend the Bush income tax cuts at the $400,000 and below mark, keep the estate tax threshold at $5 million and above, and extend unemployment benefits for 1 year. It would also temporarily delay the sequester, which is the billions of dollars in across-the-board spending cuts, for another 2 months. 2 months? That's it? The cost of continuing the current spending levels will be paid for through an even mix of tax revenue increases and later spending cuts. Half of those cuts will come from defense spending. Half will come from non-defense spending. That sounds suspiciously a lot like the deal that brought us to the fiscal cliff in the first place. But let's continue. The deal includes other tax provisions as well. It extends the child tax credit and the college tuition credit for another 5 years, individual and business tax extenders for an additional 2 years, and the Medicare, quote, doc fix for 1 year. It also is supposedly permanently fixing the alternative minimum tax to help avoid middle-class people paying the alternative minimum tax instead of those mega-rich people that it was designed to go hit. Now, notably, the fiscal package does nothing to address the debt ceiling, which the government just hit this past Monday, by the way. We are at the debt ceiling, ladies and gentlemen. The Treasury Secretary, Mr. TurboTax Geithner, sent a letter to congressional leaders earlier in the day outlining emergency measures he can take to prevent the government from defaulting on the debt. But those measures will only delay default for a matter of weeks, until right around the time when lawmakers will have to address the sequester again. What a surprise. That sets up another major fiscal fight between the White House and Congress. Again, surprise, surprise. The deal still requires buy-in from members of both parties, and Biden was set to meet with Senate Democrats Monday night to try to sell them on the package. Now, as we know, at 2 o'clock this morning, when they were hoping most of you would have passed out from your partying, this actually got passed through the Senate. But at any rate, supposedly, selling them on the package could prove challenging, given a key progressive group, including the AFL-CIO, made it clear earlier Monday that they would oppose any deal that raised the income limit for extending the Bush tax cuts above $250,000. Translation: some unions wanted people to pay higher tax rates, even though technically they're below the level that the government officially defines the middle class at. Anyway, both Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi gave the deal their blessings Monday night in a phone call with the occupier of the White House, Barack Hussein Obama. In fact, a Pelosi aide suggested that while the House Democratic leader backs the proposal on the table, she isn't completely wedded to it. She's been supportive all along, the aide said, though if House Dems have serious problems, that could move her. One of Reid's spokespeople said that Senate Democrats would have preferred to push off the sequester for longer than 2 months, but Republicans would agree. But Republicans wouldn't agree to that. The deal on the table is what we could get, in quotations. Anyway, the same aide lamented that the sequester and the debt ceiling will now need to be addressed at the same time in a matter of months. It's a lot to deal with. Update. Tuesday at 12:39 a.m., Vice President Biden's principal argument to Democrats on Monday night appeared to be that this deal was the best that could be negotiated on a bipartisan basis, and that while it might not be popular, it was better than going over the cliff. Coming out of the meeting with the Vice President late Monday night, many Senate Democrats conceded that they were displeased with the aspects of the deal, but agreed that the Vice President's larger point, quote, the disagreement on the provision and that provision and other provisions are large and wide. But the number of people who believe that we could go over the cliff rather than vote for this is very small. That was quoted from Senator Chuck Schumer. He's a Democrat from New York, in case you're not familiar with him. But anybody who follows politics probably knows good old Chucky by now. It's not that this proposal is regarded as great or is loved by any way, but it's regarded as better than going over the cliff. Schumer also added that Biden essentially argued that going over the cliff, quote, would be devastating. And he, quote, was very persuasive, but he did not have to do much convincing. Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California, I think we just talked about her a second ago, sang a similar tune with respect to Biden's message, being quoted as saying, the argument is that this is the best that we can put together in this time on a bipartisan basis. We need a bipartisan basis to get this done, so that means compromises on both sides. Well, some lawmakers sounded more positive. Barbara Boxer, also a Democrat from California, has said that the deal was good for both her state and the country. Funny Barbara would think that. My main concern here is keeping this economic recovery going, and I think this package does that. Yeah, that was Barbara again. Excuse me. The House GOP leadership also broke its silence on the deal, although Speaker Boehner, Republican from Ohio, stopped short of making any pledges to bring the bill to the House floor if it was to pass in the Senate. The House will honor its commitment to consider the Senate agreement if it's passed. That was in a joint statement issued by Boehner, the House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, Republican from Virginia, the Majority Whip, Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, and Republican Conference Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers, a Republican from Washington State. Also in that statement, quote, decisions about whether the House will seek to accept or promptly amend the measure will not be made until the House members and the American people have been able to review the legislation. Well, now, since 2 o'clock today, that's 2 o'clock a.m., the House did meet. They looked over this bill that got passed to them, and they voted to adjourn without voting indefinitely. Why? They're looking to make amendments. Why do they want to make amendments? Well, it's a little thing like this. All along, we've been told, we've been promised, we've been guaranteed by the liar-in-chief that there'd be a balanced approach. The deal that's been put on the table is even more flawed than I think most people expected. And I think if you talk to a lot of folks out there, you are expecting a mess to begin with. But here is the deal. They have asked the House to agree to increase $43 in taxes for every $1 that they're willing to cut in their planned spending. In their planned spending on those increases on the baseline budgeting. Now, for those of you who don't know or understand what baseline budgeting is, I'll go ahead and I'll explain it. For those of you who already know, I'm sorry, but please understand, there are still folks out there that just don't get it. Baseline budgeting is when you say, okay, your department is going to get this amount of money. And then automatically next year, your department's going to get this amount of money. And then automatically next year, your department's going to get this amount of money. There is a baseline. So no matter what a particular office is doing, no matter what a particular group of people are doing, whether they have to give out raises in order to spend that money, or whether they have to go waste a whole bunch of cash with an office party, or whatever it is that they have to do to spend that money, they're getting that money, and they are expected to spend it. Now, Congress some time ago changed the rules so that baseline spending also had an additional component added to it. Well, since the cost of doing business increases each and every year, we're going to automatically plug in an increase on that baseline. So the increase becomes part of the baseline. Let's say, just for simple numbers, that it's 5%. We're going to increase your budget next year by an additional 5%. All right. Now, here's what they're saying they're doing every time that they tell you that they're making budget cuts. Well, we've agreed to give you a 5% increase on this budget here because of the baseline. But what we're actually going to do is we're only going to increase you by 4%. Now, we're going to claim that 1% is a cut. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have actually seen is the budget increase an additional 4%, but they're promising you that they have made a 1% budget cut. This is just simple numbers, and the fact of the matter is they play with much bigger ones. So you have a deal that's been sent over to the House that they're going to have to amend because there's no way that can pass the House. Boehner really can't afford this bill to even be offered because his leadership, his speakership, is in mortal danger. Eric Cantor is most likely going to be the new Speaker of the House.